Well, welcome everyone to our public meeting regarding I-229 and here at Benson Road. Tonight we're going to talk about a project that we kicked off early 2018 where we're actually doing an interchange study with hopes of having a document that we turn into federal highway in the near future. And while we're doing that, we're also doing an environmental document. And so these are kind of the first steps in preparing for construction. And so I just want to welcome everyone here tonight. My name is Jason Chenstead. I'm with HDR Engineering. Also want to welcome the folks that are watching us online. We are on Facebook tonight, and so folks are able to watch us certainly at the convenience of their homes or where they might be. So anybody that participates, certainly we appreciate them doing so. The presentation tonight will be about 35 minutes. We're going to start out the presentation and talk about the project history. So I do see a few faces in here from our last study. We completed the major investment study on 229 in 2017. We held an array of public meetings in regards to Benson Road. And so we'll kind of run through how that project went, how that ended, and we'll transition into the project that we're working on now, just to kind of keep everybody in the loop so they don't have any real missteps from going from one project to the other. Tonight we will also talk about the environmental process that we're going through since we are in a stage where we're looking at determining our preferred alternative, going into final design, and eventually going into construction. We got to go through and vet the environmental constraints and go through that process. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the purpose and need, what we've really defined as the project goals. Then we're going to get to the options that were kind of the final options that we're evaluating as part of this study. Hopefully we can get some comments from you tonight on those and kind of the screening process, and then we'll talk about some next steps. And so that'll be our general agenda. We're going to start out with the corridor study area map. And so this map was what we talked about when we did the major investment study. This study started in 2013. You can see the study went all the way from 60th Street North on the north, all the way down to Soberg Avenue on the south. Initially, when we started that project, we were looking at 3 interchanges, and we were looking at all of the crossroad corridors that were crossing Interstate 229. As we got into the study, we were investigating Benson Road, 10th Street, and Minnesota Avenue are kind of our 3 major corridors. Well, when we did the initial traffic analysis, we determined that the Rice Street interchange and the Cliff Avenue interchange also needed to be vetted at a higher level than we initially planned. And so we went through that process. And it took us quite a while. We had a lot of different things we were looking at as part of the study. We also looked at different ITS applications, or for most people, they look at that stuff as being maybe digital signs that we would put out on the corridor, message boards, those type of things. We looked at variable speed limits, all of the things that we might anticipate would happen on the interstate corridor 229 over the next 20 to 40 years. And so that was a very large study. I think we held probably 50 different public involvement events between small group meetings and public meetings and stakeholder meetings. And eventually, last year, we summed up the project. We defined the priorities moving forward. And hence, this is why the Benson Road project is being worked on now. For Benson Road specifically, at I-229, the limits of the study go from Cliff Avenue over to Sycamore Avenue. And so that's consistent with the corridor study. Now, when we get farther in the presentation tonight, we'll talk about the actual limits of construction, which will be a little shorter than that. And so right now, we're identifying construction from about Lewis, just a hair west of Lewis, over to somewhere between Bonson or Hall Avenue, kind of depending on what we find out with development. Some of the things that we learned during the corridor study that are relevant for us to carry into our current study. And so as we start at Cliff Avenue, this was a location that our capacity, we were at level service D, which is really just a grading system for how traffic works. That's kind of at the higher threshold of where we want to be. If we get any lower than that into an E or F range, we have to do some capacity improvements. But one thing that kind of resonated from that study more so was some of the crashes that we were experiencing at that intersection. So certainly at some point in time when we do improvements there, we'll have to look at those crashes again and provide some mitigation strategies. A lot of the landowners, and I talked to a few gentlemen here tonight, they talked about the larger vehicles on Benson Road. We have a lot of intersections out there that it's hard for the trucks to make the turning movements. They're turning over existing sidewalks. They're also finding it very difficult even to get out onto the corridor. And one of the things, if you're a commuter out here during that PM peak hour or that AM peak hour, you get these long stretches of continuous traffic, and it's just very difficult for a vehicle that takes a little longer to get on and off the corridor. As we move over into the area between Lewis and Potsdam, Lewis Avenue serves a large employee area. Everybody knows that. And so a lot of vehicles are coming off the interstate going north on Lewis in the morning or north on Potsdam, and they're doing the opposite at night, coming back onto Benson to get back onto Interstate 229. So we do experience a fairly good amount of congestion at Lewis in the PM hour, more so than the AM hour. And Potsdam is a little different. I mean, as we go to Potsdam, that's a location that doesn't have a signal, and so in the morning it's an easy right turn to make to get to your area of business. But in the evening, we have about 200 to 300 folks that are trying to turn left back onto Benson Road to get on Interstate 229. And if you drive out here, most of the time the traffic is queued up in that outside lane, so there ain't really any gaps. And so we got to address what to do with that so we can kind of mitigate any long-term safety and crash problems that we have. And then one other thing that we noticed, this was commented on during the corridor study, was pedestrians. Right now, over the last 2 years, we've implemented some sidewalk out there, but we don't really have a thoroughfare for folks to be walking out there. The sidewalk is kind of here and there, and in these large employee areas, we're seeing a lot more desire for those folks to have sidewalk to walk at lunch and do those different things, but certainly we want to carry that into this study. At the interchange itself, this is unique. So we have land use pretty much built out on the west side of the interchange. On the east side of the interchange, we have very little land use that's developed so far. And so when we look at traffic capacity, the west interchange terminal, right now we've been watching it very closely over the last probably 10 to 12 years. We haven't implemented a signal system. We're watching that to see when that would have a signal be implemented. But the capacity is starting to get right at that limit that we're going to have to do something. In regards to the terminal on the other side, the east terminal, right now we have about 1,600 vehicles that are turning left in the morning. And so we're pretty much giving all of the time that the signal can take to that movement because we don't really have much through traffic there. And so our concern is as development takes place to the east and we have to allot more time for them, we're going to have a lot more congestion take place than we already do. And so if you've worked in this area a long time, we used to have the interchange ramp. It was a single lane ramp, and then the DOT made it into a 2-lane ramp. That really helped separate the traffic and get more traffic through here. And now we're looking ahead for that next amount of traffic to come through here. And to do that, we need to look at different interchange options, and we'll get to those here later in the presentation. Kind of our big drivers when it comes to operations in this area. And so in the morning, today's count, 1,610 vehicles take that left turn, folks going to work. That's a big number. And so if you look at I-229 at 41st Street, probably one of the other larger interchanges in Sioux Falls, we've seen numbers anywhere from 1,200 to 1,400 over in that area. So by far, this interchange sees the largest left turning volume in the city of Sioux Falls. And so what we typically look at is, kind of what happens in the opposite peak hour of the day. So the blue would represent the PM peak hour. We have about 90% of those people we see in the morning are coming back trying to get onto I-229 to go back southbound. And so those two numbers are very large. I would say a standard ramp in the city of Sioux Falls, probably in the state, is anywhere from 600 to 1,000, maybe 1,200 vehicles. And so we're seeing a very large volume out here, and it's just because we have large employers out here, and so we need to service those industries. As we get to the east side, now this is an area that we have very little development that took place. We certainly know on the south side, we're starting to see some development south closer to Rice Street, but development plans are being looked at, being talked about on what could happen in that area. We got a lot of undeveloped land, and we would say that's probably pretty prime for development. So in the not too distant future, we are going to see volumes generated from here, and we need to figure out what to do with them. Another key component to looking at the east side is really the connection between Benson Road and 60th Street North. And so Bonson Avenue is an area that they've identified. This road was going to go in a few years ago. Some grant funding had fallen through, but it will not be too long, and that roadway will be another conveyance over to Benson Road, and certainly we'll have volumes of traffic that are able to be shared between those corridors. And then if we look down here in the corner, this is even maybe a little further out in the future, the extension of Sycamore Avenue. So you can look at the extension to serve additional land that's on the east side of the river, and the potential of Sycamore Avenue to go all the way over to Rice Street. And so all of these things we considered when we were looking at future traffic volumes and what the corridor needed to look like on the east side of I-229. And so all of that was done during the corridor study. We went through a higher level concept evaluation process. We looked at operations, traffic operations. We looked at safety. How does the interchange work now? If we generated a new option, how would that interchange work in the future? We looked at a high level on environmental impacts. What type of cultural concerns do we have? Wetlands, streams, floodplains. Property impacts. Does one interchange option need a lot of property from the adjacent landowners or developers, or don't we need any? And that really gets into the construction and right-of-way cost. And so we have options here that range anywhere from probably 20 to 40 million, depending on what we're doing. And so we're not going to really explicitly give you that information and show you which one is more expensive. We really want for you guys to comment on the different options so we can have that takeaway from tonight. And so with the corridor study, we generated a variety of options, and we went through them, and we either advanced them, and so we could use them in the current study we're working on, or we eliminated them at that time. So there was really no need to go back now with our study and kind of reinvest time into those options. We already screened them out. And so we carried 3 options forward in the corridor study. We'll go through these, and remember, kind of our key things, our traffic volumes in the morning, 1,600 vehicles are wanting to go this direction here. They're coming up to the signal and taking a left. In the evening, we got over 1,400 that want to get back on. So that's kind of the driver in what we were looking at for interchange options. And so Benson 1A from the corridor study looked at bringing a dual lane off-ramp off of I-229. Folks that want to go eastbound would follow the ramp up to the intersection and go east. The folks that wanted to go to the west side of the interchange would simply take the loop ramp. This would be a 2-lane loop ramp. When they come up to Benson Road, they would not go through a signal. This would be a free flow movement. And so all of those vehicles that have to stop at the signal now under this option would not have to stop. And so that is certainly something that would be beneficial. A lot of folks indicated that they really like not having to sit there and go through a signal. At the same time, at the evening hour, we looked at putting in dual rights for those folks to get back on to the interstate. This movement that would have to go through the signal, that left turn, we'd allow them to turn while traffic was going and merging on the ramps. We actually had a 3-lane ramp that would go to 2, that would go to 1. And so if you drove on I-29, 12th Street, Benson Road, any of those interchanges, you can make that left turn while there's a lane coming from the right side, and you merge as you go on the ramp. And so for that reason, we have to lengthen out the ramp a fair amount just to handle that traffic. Benson 1B, this is just another caveat of that option. But on this option here, we looked at only having a 2-lane ramp. And so we were right at that threshold between needing to go to duals or leaving it at a single lane. And so we kind of left them both in there, not knowing what we'd find out. Because when we did this study, we looked to the year 2035. Now in our current study, we're looking to the year 2045 in our design timeline. But one thing to note on this option, all of this red area down here, this is land that we would have to acquire from the adjacent landowners. So as they look at their development plans, they're waiting on us to tell them what type of land we need, how much, and they need to assess how that's going to affect their development strategies. Our Benson option 4, and so you see we jumped from 1 to 4, that means 2 and 3 didn't make the cut. And so those got eliminated. And now we're at Benson 4. This option is what we call a diverging diamond interchange. Has anybody driven through a diverging diamond interchange that's in the room? And so about 2011, Shannon and I and a few others in here, Steve, where we're working on the 41st Street corridor study, we developed this option called a diverging diamond. There wasn't very many of them in the United States. We asked people to raise their hand, and we didn't have anybody in there that raised their hand. And frankly, they looked at us kind of strange. And so now that we're in 2018, we see a lot more. 30–40% of the people in the room have driven through them. We have them in just adjacent communities, Moorhead, Minnesota, Minneapolis. You go about every direction. Rapid City is going to get one. Sioux Falls is going to get one at another location. And so they're very common, what we believe are easy to navigate. And we'll show you tonight kind of how those work. But some of the key things here, when we look at that 1,600 vehicles in the morning, we would need triple lefts with this design. And so the only place that I've seen triple lefts in before is Las Vegas. And so we've done a lot of research, and they're in quite a few different areas. And so we'll talk about that as well. But that'll allow us to service that traffic a little more efficient. DDIs are known to be very good and efficient because they are a two-operation signal. And so the only people that stop at the signal are the through traffic at those 2 points. And so anybody that's accessing on or off a ramp has a free movement, or they're going at another time when the traffic is stopped. And so anytime when we can get that a signal to be two-phase, we maximize how much traffic we can push through there. So if you can imagine right now at this intersection, we have about 4 phases. We have traffic running east, we have traffic running west, we have the folks that are coming out here that want to take a left and go north, and then we have the folks that are coming on to the ramp that want to take a left. And so everybody has their own signal. They get a left turn arrow, and we got to give all those people a certain amount of time. Well, we want to take all those movements out if we can to really allow for that ramp traffic to enter much more efficient. I have some videos that will kind of go over, kind of make it clearer in your head on what it looks like. For the west side of Benson Road, we spent a lot of time on this in the corridor study. When we look at those future volumes, we look like we need a 6-lane roadway. Right now, we just have 2 lanes in each direction. With a center turn lane, we would go to 3 lanes in each direction to manage that flow. And considering that we're looking to the year 2045, that's more traffic than we're seeing out there today. And so this is kind of a unique design. We'd have 4 lanes across the bridge. We'd allow for 1 lane to exit at Potsdam, 1 would exit at Lewis, and then we'd carry 2 lanes over to Cliff Avenue. And so this design really sets up well for the type of traffic that we're seeing at the interchange. As we come down in the PM hour, we have to make some striping improvements to Lewis Avenue. Right now, we're lucky there's enough width out there to lengthen those dual left turn lanes that we have. We're going to have to make some improvements on Lewis on the south end. We'll actually start the 3rd lane a little bit on the west side of Lewis, and then we'll have 3 lanes all the way over to the interstate. And so these are all the things. One thing to note, if you're a landowner out in this area, when we go to 6 lanes, we go with an implemented median section as an access management treatment. It gets awful wide for vehicles to turn across all of those lanes. One of the concerns we heard at the corridor study meetings was at Potsdam, people going to the gas station or into this area, or Potsdam going north, they wanted to maintain those movements. We've done a lot of research, and we've actually implemented what we call 3/4 intersections, where you can make 3 out of 4 movements. So if you go to Potsdam, you'll still be able to take a left, you'll still be able to take a right out or a right in. If you would want to take a left and go west over to Cliff Avenue, you'd reroute over to Lewis and take a left at a signal. Okay. If you're on the other side, if you're Sanford has this building now, if you want to go into the main driveway here, you could simply take a left turn here, do a U-turn, come back and go in the main driveway. And so having the ability to manage 3 out of those 4 movements was much greater supported than going simply to a right in, right out. So the other driveways that are along here, we don't have the spacing to accommodate the same, and so some of these driveways will be limited to right in, right out, so they'll use some of their side driveways to get to the locations that they have full access. So we finished the corridor study. Benson Road was determined to be a high priority interchange because we knew with the development coming to the east side that if it become something great, we're going to have some major interchange problems. The last thing we want to do is back up traffic onto the main line. We have a few locations, 10th Street, 26th Street, where you see that kind of on a daily basis where we got traffic backed up, and those are where we can have our severe problems. And so 26th Street, due to that and some other capacity issues, that project was fast-tracked. And so that'll actually be started in construction next year in 2019. And we're making other improvements at some of the locations to buy us some time. And so from that study that came out, this was a high priority location. We identified to go through the process of determining and generating the interchange justification report, doing the environmental process, going through design, getting all the right-of-way that we needed, and commencing construction was about a 5-year process. So here we are. And so we got through the study. The city and the DOT jointly got together, and we're in the process of preparing those documents and getting ready for construction in 2023. And so the environmental process. So anytime when we look at completing a project like this, our federal friends require us to go through this process of making sure that we're really vetting out all the options and selecting the right option. And it's really a good process. And so I'm going to kind of show you where we're at now. There's several stages to it. The scoping component, this is really where you're looking at items that need to be addressed. Really, the 229 corridor study helped us do that. That was kind of our scoping component. With this study, we generated a purpose and need. That'll be the next slide that we go through. What do we actually need to do? We need to develop alternatives that satisfy that purpose and need. We need to do an evaluation, making sure that we have a matrix that we're comparing all of the options and really identifying the right one. And that's where we're at now. So we've generated the options. We're in the process of going through a matrices to identify what that looks like. And then as we get to our second public meeting, that's where we'll go through our selection of the preferred alternative. We'll go through the matrix, what the numbers, everything shook out to be. We'll bring that back to you. And at that point, we'll be ready to submit a draft document on the environmental and move through that process. And so this is our first meeting of introducing that to you, and we're very happy to do that. But it's a consensus building process. And so before we kind of get through that process, we want to take additional public comment. This is a really good time because we did get a lot of good comments during the corridor study. But now we know that construction is in sight. I used to think 5 years down the road, my goodness, that's forever. But it certainly isn't anymore. It just takes us that long to work through the process. Some of the major items out here, I'll go through a map, but wetland streams and floodplains, we have an area. We have all of those that are in our area. Land use impacts, since we're looking at right-of-way, we're impacting land. Certainly that's something we need to consider. Cultural resource findings. This part of Sioux Falls has a variety of items between threatened and endangered species, cultural resource items, and so we're studying that to determine if we have any impacts. Economic impacts, that's always something that's considered. Environmental conditions noted, I'll kind of point out a few things in regards to this study area. And finally, the other thing is that we take into account is always the public landowners, stakeholders, commuters, any of their comments on what they think would work in here. And maybe tonight we'll generate another option. Hopefully, maybe you guys can find some of the options that you like and let us know what those are. And so our project purpose and need, sometimes we have a lot of different things that we need to overcome. With this interchange, really our main thing to do is improve the traffic operations, but at the same time enhance the mobility of maybe non-automobile traffic. And so, as I noted, we didn't have sidewalks throughout the corridor. That's something that we want to add with the future project. Pedestrians, we want to make sure it's set up for transit. And so at some point in time, especially with the employment areas out here, there's certainly the potential for transit to be a bigger player in moving folks from their home to their jobs. And then bikes, how do we want to get bikes in this area? Is it, do we need separated lanes? Those type of things we looked at. We looked at a lot with the corridor study as well. And so that's kind of our project purpose. Now, our project need simply solve the capacity concerns that we have under existing conditions and then 2045. and then lack of accessibility for non-automobile transportation. And so if you look at the bottom graphic, these are level of service values. And I kind of said that earlier. If we have level of service A, B, or C, that's good. It's just like your grading system in school. That's positive. If it's D, E, or F, that means we're probably in the point we need to make some improvements. And you can see 3 out of the 6 intersections that we evaluated in existing conditions already fall below our level of service requirements. So when we look out to 2045, those conditions get worse. We add another intersection to that. And so we need to figure out what will make this corridor work for the foreseeable future. And typically we will look out 30 to 35 years. That's kind of the length of time that concrete and asphalt and those things last. So once we put it down, we want it to manage the traffic that we have until we need to do replacement of that surfacing. And so this is maybe a little harder to see for you folks. In some of the environmental considerations, you can see right at the east end of our corridor, this is Sycamore Avenue. This is the floodplain and floodway for the Big Sioux River. We have a water quality BMP that exists right along our corridor. We have these blue lines are intermittent streams. So if we impact those, we have to do mitigation for those. We got wetlands that exist inside our boundaries. As we went through and did some of our environmental studies, we have a lot of areas out here that have petroleum on their site. And so these don't necessarily mean that there's an issue, but they show up as a location that we need to make sure that if we're on their land doing work, that we determine if we have to do any mitigation for petroleum. And so there's all these different things that we have to do along with socioeconomic impacts, threatened endangered species. All of these things we'll be looking at with this study, and we've done those corresponding studies and determined. So really what we want to do to minimize those environmental considerations is shrink that footprint. You know, if we're coming up with an interchange design that fits inside that right-of-way, that's probably our best strategy in minimizing environmental concerns. But to do that, we need to make sure that we also meet our purpose and need of managing and helping that traffic capacity. And so evaluation of concepts, and so as I indicated, we ended the I-229 major investment study with 3 options, 1 and 4. And so from those 3, we actually generated those back into 7. And so that was a higher level study. We're really digging in now, trying to find the right option to move forward with. And so those kind of expanded into a few more options. And that's what we'll do. We'll kind of go through those. Those are what's on the boards out in the entryway. And really that's what we want to take comments on. After we get done with the presentation, we'll open up and take some general questions as well. Okay, so you don't need to read all of this. I know we're online tonight. This will also go on the website, and so we do have some text that's shown here simply for people to go through, and if they are not at the meeting, be able to go through and read through if they're not here listening to me. And so I just wanted to point out a few things. This is scenario or alternative 1A. This is an option that we used, the loop ramp configuration, that 2-lane loop ramp configuration to get traffic off, certainly in that AM peak hour. We have dual right turn lanes to get back on with a lengthened ramp. Some of the drawbacks of this option are the large amount of right-of-way that we need to get. A few things, you're going to see a lot of these options kind of look similar, but they're not. This option here to kind of restrict some of the right-of-way concerns, we bought that ramp in. Those movements right now, we want those to make a right turn anyway, and so we brought them back in closer to the bridge. They can make that right turn to go eastbound, and so that saved some right-of-way up in this area. In regards to traffic capacity, this interchange works at level service B. In the year 2045, this free flow movement is something that's supported by the folks that are out there, that they don't have to stop at a traffic signal. And you'll see up and down the corridor we do have access management treatments, and so that's very good. I'm just going to kind of blow up the area and point out those few things. One other item that we are addressing with this is that pedestrian or bike connectivity right in this location here, just due to this long crossing, and then if folks would have to cross an intersection with a free flow movement, if you've ever tried to do that, that gets very difficult. And so we're implementing what we call a pedestrian underpass, and this is basically a box culvert that's large enough to handle folks walking through that or riding their bike through it. The bottom graphic here in the corner, that's 32nd Avenue South in Fargo, North Dakota. Very similar type of interchange that we have. We have a loop ramp. This is more of a standard diamond, but this route right here is an underpass, and it goes right back to the bridge, a similar configuration. They work really well, separating that pedestrian traffic from our roadway traffic. Scenario 2, I'm just going to kind of pop this up, and so down in this area here, this is maybe a more conventional design. Instead of bringing that ramp up here where it's a direct right turn movement, we bring it up, and so that ramp is governed by the signal that's here. And so we had a lot of discussion with our study advisory team in regards to this option. Some liked it because if somebody got on this ramp, it did give them the option of still making that left turn if they didn't realize that they were supposed to go under and use the loop ramp. If you remember, we had a very similar configuration at 229 in Louise here in town. That was built in the mid-90s, I think. And what would happen at that location is, due to the length of the loop ramp, we had a lot of people that would use the signal. And so we kind of split that and maybe didn't maximize the importance of the loop ramp. And so they took that ability for them to go away. And so if this was the preferred option, we'd probably try to get a larger radius and really get them so, we'd discourage that movement to take place if we could. But certainly still an option, but certainly if we did that, we would need additional right-of-way than compared to option 1A. 1C, this is a little different type of design. If you look at the boards, we call it kind of a CD road type of design. And so in some of the cities you drive through, you may get off at an interchange and you drive on a 2-lane road. They're called collector-distributor roads, and they're really close to the main line pavement, maybe separated by a barrier. And so this is another option. We would actually do a CD road that would come off very shortly after the bridge, the Big Sioux River Bridge. We would add 2 lanes along I-229. We'd have a barrier that would start down in this area that would stay very tight to the main line. The loop ramp would stay the same. But if we did that, our eastbound ramp here for those folks to go eastbound would be primarily where it is now. And so this option allows us not to get any right-of-way. And so that's a very good option, although in regards to construction, we have a lot more pavement that we need to put down, but a very good option. I mean, it certainly reduces the right-of-way needs. We don't, in any of the loop options, really reduce the right-of-way needs up in that corner. That's a concern for us because we get into this intermittent stream and some right-of-way impacts and some wetland impacts. So. This is just a rendered view. If you go to the website, this would be on there. And so if you look at the existing interchange, this would be where the existing ramp is. This is where the existing off-ramp, on-ramp. And so this would be our dual ramp rendered over the existing aerial. So that kind of gives you an idea of what it may look like if we went to a loop ramp configuration. Kind of neat, but you do see how far we get out with this other ramp. We're really starting to fill in this area of the stream, and that's a concern. As we get into 1D and 1E, this is a different version of a loop ramp. We'd actually call this more of a folded diamond type of interchange. We have some concerns with it in regards to our purpose and need, though. And so you kind of see the strategies as we name the scenarios. Though we left them all 1, we made them A through E, really, so they're corresponding to the original ones of the corridor study that were 1 as well, just so people can kind of follow them between the 2 studies. But when it comes to this type of interchange, one of our goals here, if you've seen on the other options, we had bridge widening that was up to 2 lanes. And so we were trying to figure out how we could minimize the number of lanes that would cross the bridge in that location so we wouldn't have to widen the bridge that much. And so we brought this dual lane off-ramp into the signal, and then the idea is the signal would allow them to go across, and if that was the case, we would only need 3 lanes instead of the 4 lanes to cross the bridge for that westbound direction. If you've been through the intersection of 229 and Louise, that's an interchange that has dual rights and dual lefts. And they've tried a few different things at that location, letting folks do a right turn on red. Do you guys know what those are? And so you can take a right turn even if there's a red light. And so there's concerns around the different states that how does that work if you have 2 right turn lanes, because this guy in this outside lane may block the inside lane. If he's lagging, you can run into rear end collisions, those type of things. And so as a study team, we just didn't feel that we had enough support maybe enough information to really be okay with moving forward with this option. And so when we ran the capacity assessment, we ran it not allowing right turns on red. And if you can imagine, at any given signal, right turns on red, there's a lot of people that do that. And so we lose a lot of traffic. Not all of them have to run through the signal. But when we make everybody run through this signal, especially over 1,600 vehicles, we don't meet our capacity needs, okay? And so if we don't use that right turn on red, our intersection does not meet our purpose and need. And so we're not going to be able to really advance that one forward. This was the same one. We generated these options really before we knew all of the operation assessment, but this would be the same way, same option, same concerns here in that quadrant. Scenario 4A, now we're jumping over to the diverging diamond configuration. And so there's several benefits to these. Some ones to easily note is you don't see a lot of red around this interchange, so we're almost using the existing configuration, the existing ramps. We're making them wider in some cases, but in general, we're inside the right-of-way with the stream and wetland impacts over here. We're not getting into those type of things. And so in regards to construction costs, moving dirt, environmental concerns, this has a lot of upsides to it. When we look at predictive crashes, that's one of the things that we have to do with our studies now. We look in the future and say, well, how would this interchange work in regards to crashes? These interchanges have proven to be very safe. And so a lot of reduction in crashes that we see at existing diamond interchanges. The level of service at the interchange, level service C, really manages things well. The cost is very good, requires no right-of-way, and as I mentioned, fewer environmental concerns. And so this is really a blown up. You can kind of see the triple F configuration that exists in this location. One thing that we believe that would really help is the signing configuration. So we'd have an overhead sign that would take place. If you wanted to go to Potsdam Avenue, for example, right in this location, you would use the right left turn lane. If you wanted to go to Lewis, you'd use the center. And if you just wanted to go west on Benson Road, you'd use the outside left turn lane. And so when we look at that total volume, we have about 300 to 400 people that take that right at Potsdam. We have about 700 to 800 that take a right at Lewis. And then so when you look at the total 1,600, we have about 1,000 that want to take a right in that first half mile, about 600 to 700 that want to go through. So that does a really good job of kind of separating that traffic out, letting them know where they need to go along the corridor. So that sign would be somewhere down here. So as you enter in those turn lanes, you know where to go. This configuration really lends itself nicely with the curvature for the dual rights to go back on the off-ramp in the evening hours, so it works really well for that. In regards to triple Fs, this is a project that HDR was involved with in Sarasota, Florida. This is a diverging diamond interchange, a little different. Ours is actually going over the interchange or over the interstate. This is going under, and so this is a pretty standard design. It really just depends on whether your crossroad is under or over currently. And so these three lanes enter when these folks over here are stopped. And so they enter. As you can see, there's a signal right here, same as will be at our location. When these folks get a red over here, they enter those lanes. And the reason that we have a signal is because they're entering across lanes and they're getting in position to make those movements if they need to take a right here or wherever they need to go as we move forward. And so I did throw in this is just another version of a diverging diamond interchange. This one is right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm just going to run the video here so you can kind of see how they operate. And so as you see folks coming up through the stop bar, these folks have a free flow movement that are going right here because these folks are stopped. All of the ramp traffic, once they go through either this signal or this signal, they have that free flow movement. That's very important. That makes things very efficient. And so you can see these guys are on their cell phone. These guys are going, they're stopped. They should actually be moving at that point, and so I kind of laughed at that. But this is just kind of a general overview of a diverging diamond. There's a lot of different configurations. Over, under, number of lanes are determined by the actual level of traffic that you have, but how they operate is very similar. And so that was scenario one, or I'm going to go back. I forgot to mention one thing on that. And so when we look at this option here, right now we have currently a 5-lane wide bridge. And so what we need is, with these turning movements here, the added traffic that we have in the future going westbound on Benson Road, we have 4 lanes that are here. And so we have to widen that existing bridge 2 lanes. Well, when we were talking to the DOT bridge engineers, the folks that designed that structure, they're a little concerned because that bridge is, the way that it was designed, it's going to be harder, maybe a little more expensive just to widen out, okay? And so when we looked at 4B, one of the other options that we could look at, instead of widening this existing bridge, they actually thought it might be cheaper if we just built another bridge right next to it. And so this is just another option, another caveat. It really kind of changes. Instead of widening to the south, we widen to the north. And so we have to pop up our roadway over here. We have quite a bit of right-of-way through here, so it doesn't really hurt too many things in regards to right-of-way. But it works really well. And so I brought another animation. This is a DDI that has separated structures, just so you could see what those look like. And right there, if you go out to the current bridge now, we have sidewalk that exists on this side, sidewalk that exists on this side. And so we have that sidewalk there. It looked, really similar to how it does out there today. And so this might be a very good option. The nice thing that I like about it is building that bridge off to the north side is we have a better availability to keep traffic on the existing bridge. And so that may simplify a few things. As we move forward, we certainly want to take a stronger look at these 2 options because there's a lot of very good things about them. And so this presentation will be on our website, so if you guys want to go back and click through and watch the animations. If you're on Google DDIs, they're all over. I mean, the number of DDIs across the United States now are lots of them. And so you have a lot of examples out there. I really kind of enjoy looking at the different configurations. And so this is just an example of what it would look like if it was separated structures. Again, this is just a rendered view of a diverging diamond. As you can see, the existing ramps come up. As you're on the interchange coming up to the Benson Road, the crossroad, you're not really going to see a whole lot. And so if you're concerned that a diverging diamond may be difficult to drive through or confusing, as you go through there, all of these movements are directional movements. And so when you look ahead of you, you have signing, you have a barrier, you have curb. They're really pretty user-friendly to drive through. And last week I was coming through Wyoming. I was out there on a very quick hunting trip, and I was driving with 3 other guys that have never been through a diverging diamond interchange. We were in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and drove through one. I never said anything until we drove through it. We drove up to it, and they all kind of looked, "What is this thing?" And so we drove through it. They go through, and they didn't really know why it was done that way, but they had no problems driving through it. And so I told them what it was afterwards, why it was designed that way, and they understood that. But yeah, it's not really something that's too difficult to learn how to drive through, and they found to be certainly very safe. As we get to the west side of the corridor, nothing really changed from the corridor study into this. We refined the design based on some utilities, those type of things. We're still looking at the 3/4 movement at Potsdam, intersection at Lewis would be expanded. And then as we get to the east side, and so as we mentioned in the beginning, we don't really know what the limits of construction would be, whether they would go through Bonson and tie back in, or if they go all the way through Hall under this first design. It'll really depend on what type of development we see in this area as we're going through design, or at least what the developers are indicating that could take place. But based on the traffic we are seeing in that area of about 15,000 vehicles per day that's generated, so we do need to go to the 4-lane configuration. And since we don't have that land use, this is a prime location to implement the access management treatments and make sure we can preserve the capacity on that roadway. And so this is the evaluation matrix that we generated for the project. On the first 3 really talks about the items in regards to purpose and need. We have 2045 traffic operations, and this goes from the intersections to the ramps to the main line, making sure that we have good operations along our interstate corridor, along our crossroad safety, how are things going to work in the future in regards to crashes, and what type of crashes will we have? Will they result in fatalities? Those are something that are really important to us. We want to make sure that we're mitigating those if at all possible. Driver familiarity, certainly as I've been in Sioux Falls doing this work, we've implemented several different types of interchanges. We had single points were kind of an interchange that we designed 10 to 15 years ago. Now we're transitioning the diverging diamonds when they make sense. We have loop ramp configurations already that are here. And so we try to gauge and get comments from folks like you to determine if it's going to be difficult or if you feel it's going to be difficult. How do the options handle construction? Can we still get traffic through there? How concerning is that to the businesses or the folks that need to get through there? Comparative costs. Certainly we look at costs. It isn't the overall factor. We can have an option that's more expensive still be the right option, but we do look at costs. And then any of the applicable environmental impacts, that'll be part of our matrices, and we'll show you that at our next meeting all filled out and let you know what kind of the final findings were. And so next steps today, we're holding our initial public meeting to introduce the environmental study and indicate where we're at in the process. Very shortly, we'll be submitting our first document, which will be our interchange modification report for review. And so we want to do that here after our public meeting. Our second public meeting really isn't going to be too far down the road. And so February, March, we'd like to come back, present to you our preferred option, go through the matrices and gain feedback from you, hopefully get some consensus that the option that we've chosen is the right one. And then by April, be ready to submit our final environmental document, and then really move into design later this year. We have enough information to start on design. That'll be fine-tuned over the next 20 months. By about mid-part of 2020, we want to be getting into the right-of-way acquisition and permitting. Certainly some options are going to take more time than others in regards to that. But at the end result is we want to be in construction no later than 2023. And so that's kind of our steps moving forward. www.bensonroadproject.com, that's the project website. Any study documents that have been approved by the study team have been posted, so you can look through those. We have our predictive crash document on there, existing traffic information, a lot of different things, and we'll keep adding to that as we go through the study. Finally, if you have any questions, comments, anything, you can go to the website, click on the Contact Us portal. That emails me directly. And so you can do that. You can leave a comment regarding this meeting. For the folks that are watching, you can certainly go here. A good way to get a hold of me. If you're here tonight out on our table out front, we do have comment cards. You can fill those out tonight, drop them in the box, take them home, mail them in. Those will go to Shannon up at the city. We'll compile those and make sure that we use those comments as we go through the design. But the website's a very good location to find information. If you go here, there's also a link back to the I-229 study website. And so if you have any questions on any of the other interchanges, Cliff Avenue, Minnesota Avenue, 10th Street, Rice Street, any of those, you can go back to the other website. This will be a link on this one that will take you there. Certainly on that one, you can also send me an email. I'd love to take comments on that as well. And that's really all we have tonight. Wanted to thank everybody for attending, and those that are watching us online. Thank you for attending. If you go and have any questions, I'm at the top for the project contacts. Aaron Fagerness is here tonight. He's one of our lead designers. Shannon Austin with the city is sitting down here. He'll be helping me take questions. Steve Graham is in the yellow shirt with the DOT. He's our project management, our project development coordinator for the project, and Stacy Duchesne is our local engineering project manager that will be really facilitating and help us go through the design.